The wind howled across the scorched plains of Cathura 7, carrying with it the bitter smell of ash and ruin that had settled over the land like a funeral shroud. And Cole hardly pulled his collar higher against the dust as his hover steed hummed beneath him, its engines cutting through the silence of a world that had known too much war. He had been riding for 3 days now, crossing territories that had once been lush with alien vegetation but now stood as blackened monuments to the Syndicate's cruelty. And everywhere he looked, he saw the same devastation: burned forests, collapsed settlements, and the scattered remains of lives that had been torn apart by greed and violence. The Syndicate War had ended 6 months ago when the human coalition finally drove the invaders from this sector. But victory had come at a terrible cost, and the scars on this planet would take generations to heal. If they ever healed at all, Cole was not a soldier anymore, not officially anyway. But he could not sit idle while survivors remained scattered across these wounded lands. So he had volunteered for search and rescue missions, riding out alone into the wilderness to find those who had been forgotten. His hover steed, a sturdy machine he had named Dusty after the color of its worn metal hull, carried supplies enough for a week: food rations, water purification tablets, medical kits, and emergency blankets, and Cole hoped it would be enough for whoever he might find. Sun was beginning to set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Cole of fire, and he decided to make camp near a collapsed cave system that offered some shelter from the wind. As he dismounted and began unpacking his gear, he heard something that made him freeze in place. It was not the growl of a predator or the whine of damaged machinery, but something softer and more desperate: a whimper, followed by a low rasping sound that might have been a voice trying to speak. Cole's hand moved instinctively to the plasma revolver at his hip, but he did not draw it, not yet, because something in that sound spoke of fear rather than threat, of weakness rather than danger. He approached the mouth of the cave slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and called out in a calm and steady voice, asking if anyone was there and promising that he meant no harm. For a long moment there was only silence, and then he heard movement from within the darkness, the scrape of scales against stone and the shuffle of small bodies. Pressing closer together, Cole activated the light on his wrist unit and stepped inside. And what he saw made his heart clench with a pain he had not felt in years. Huddled in the deepest corner of the cave was a Draconith female, her once beautiful emerald scales now dulled and cracked from malnutrition, her wings torn and hanging limp at her sides. And behind her, pressed against the cold stone wall, were 3 small hatchlings who stared at Cole with eyes full of terror. The Draconith were a proud species, dragon-like beings who had inhabited this region of space for thousands of years before humans ever arrived. And they had been hunted nearly to extinction by the Syndicate, who harvested their fire glands for use in weapons manufacturing. Cole had seen the aftermath of those harvests during the war: bodies left hollow and broken, families torn apart, entire communities wiped from existence, and the memory of it still haunted his dreams. The mother positioned herself between Cole and her children, her body trembling with the effort of staying upright, and she bared her teeth in what was meant to be a threatening display. But there was no strength behind it, only desperation. "We haven't eaten in days," she whispered, her voice cracked and hollow like dry leaves crumbling in the wind. "If you are here to finish what the Syndicate started, then make it quick. But please, I beg you, spare my children." The words hit Cole like a punch to the chest, and for a moment he could not speak, could not move, could only stand there as the weight of her suffering pressed down on him. He thought of his wife, Nora, who had died 3 years ago protecting colonist children from pirates, who had believed with every fiber of her being that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe. And he knew exactly what she would have done in this moment. Cole slowly removed his hand from his revolver and held both palms up where the Draconith could see them. showing her that he carried no threat. And then he knelt down on the cave floor so that he was no longer towering over her. "Ma'am," he said softly, tipping his hat in a gesture of respect that his father had taught him long ago. "My name is Cole Hartley, and I ain't here to hurt nobody. Not you and not your little ones." The Draconith watched him with golden eyes that flickered between hope and suspicion. And Cole could see the battle playing out within her, the desperate need to believe him warring against the trauma of everything she had endured. "The Syndicate is gone from this world," Cole continued, keeping his voice gentle and even. "The war is over. And I'm just a man looking for survivors who need help. And I reckon I've got some fruit in my pack that needs eating." He gestured toward the cave entrance where Dusty waited with his supplies. And then he stood slowly and began backing away, giving her space to breathe and to think. "I'm going to go get my supplies," he said. "And I'm going to bring them back here. And you and your young ones are going to eat until your bellies are full. And then we're going to figure out how to get you somewhere safe." The smallest hatchling, a tiny creature with scales the color of sunset, peeked out from behind its mother's wing and made a small chirping sound that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. The mother looked at her children, at their hollow cheeks and their trembling limbs, and something in her seemed to break and rebuild itself all at once. And when she turned back to Cole, there were tears streaming down her scaled face. "Why?" she asked, the single word carrying the weight of all her confusion and all her pain. "Why would a human help us?" Cole paused at the entrance of the cave and looked back at her, at this broken mother who had lost everything but still fought to protect her young. And he felt something stir in his chest that he had thought long dead. "Because someone once told me that a man's worth ain't measured by what he keeps," he said quietly, "but by what he gives. And I've been trying to live up to those words ever since." He walked out into the fading light to gather his supplies. And behind him he heard the soft sound of the hatchlings whispering to their mother, asking her if the strange human could be trusted. He did not hear her answer. But when he returned with his arms full of rations and water, she did not bare her teeth at him again. And that was enough for now. Cole spread his supplies on the cave floor with careful movements, arranging the ration bars and nutrient packets and water canisters in neat rows so that the Draconith family could see everything clearly. And he made sure to keep his hands visible at all times, because trust was not something that could be rushed. The mother watched him with those golden eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom and weeks of suffering. And she had not moved from her protective position in front of her children. But the tension in her body had eased just slightly. "My name is Vera," she said at last, her voice still weak but steadier than before. "Vera of the Sunscale clan, and these are my children, Ember, Ash, and Flicker." Cole nodded respectfully and repeated each name, making sure to pronounce them correctly. And he noticed how the hatchlings perked up at the sound of their names on a stranger's tongue. Oldest hatchling, Ember, had scales of deep crimson that caught the light from Cole's wrist unit. And he stared at the human with an intensity that suggested he was trying to memorize every detail, every movement, every possible threat. The middle child, Ash, was smaller and quieter, with scales of pale gray that reminded Cole of smoke rising from a dying fire. And she kept her face pressed against her mother's side, as if trying to disappear. But Flicker, the youngest, was different from the others, possessing a curiosity that seemed to override her fear. And her scales shimmered between orange and gold as she crept forward, inch by inch, toward the strange objects Cole had laid out. "It's okay," Cole said gently, picking up one of the ration bars and unwrapping it slowly. "This here is food. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill your belly." He broke the bar in half and held one piece out toward Flicker, keeping his arm extended and his body still so that she could approach at her own pace. Vera made a soft sound of warning, but she did not stop her daughter. and after a long moment of hesitation, Flicker darted forward and snatched the food from Cole's hand before retreating to a safe distance. The little hatchling sniffed the ration bar suspiciously, then took a tiny bite, and her eyes went wide with something that looked like wonder. "Mama," she chirped, her small voice filled with excitement. "It's good. It tastes like the grain cakes you used to make before the bad ones came." That simple statement seemed to break something loose in Vera, and she let out a shuddering breath as tears began to fall from her eyes. Once more Cole pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of her emotions while he continued to distribute the food, passing ration bars to Ember and Ash and opening a water canister that he placed within easy reach of the family soon. All three hatchlings were eating with the desperate hunger of those who had gone too long without, and Vera finally allowed herself to accept a portion as well, though she ate slowly and kept pausing to check on her children. "There's plenty more where that came from," Cole assured her, settling back against the cave wall and pulling out his own ration bar, because he knew that eating together was a sign of trust in many cultures, and he wanted to show her that he considered them equals as the hatchlings ate. Their fear began to transform into something else. Not quite comfort, but perhaps the first tentative steps toward it, and Flicker actually moved closer to Cole, studying him with those bright, curious eyes. "Why do you wear that thing on your head?" she asked, pointing at his hat with one small clawed finger. Cole chuckled softly and removed the hat, turning it over in his hands so she could see it better. "It's called a hat," he explained. "Where I come from, lots of folks wear them to keep the sun out of their eyes and the dust out of their hair. And my daddy gave me this one when I was not much older than you." Flicker seemed fascinated by this information, and even Ember and Ash had stopped eating to listen, their young faces curious despite their lingering wariness. "Where do you come from?" Ember asked, his voice cautious but genuinely interested. Cole thought about how to answer, how to explain the long and winding path that had brought him to this moment, and he decided that honesty was the only currency worth trading in. "I grew up on a little farming colony about 12 systems from here," he said. "A place called New Montana, where the sky was big and blue and the grass went on forever. And I spent my days helping my folks raise cattle and grow crops." He paused, remembering the smell of rain on dry earth and the sound of his mother singing in the kitchen, and a familiar ache settled in his chest. "When I got older, I became a terraformer," he continued, "which means I helped make other planets safe for people to live on. And I traveled all over the galaxy, doing that work until the war started." Vera was listening intently now, her food forgotten in her claws, and Cole could see that she was trying to understand this human who had appeared in her darkest hour. "You said someone taught you that thing about giving," she said quietly. "About a man's worth being measured by what he gives rather than what he keeps." Cole nodded, and for a moment he could see Nora's face as clearly as if she were standing right beside him, her warm brown eyes, her gentle smile, the way she always believed in the good in people, even when that good was hard to find. "Her name was Nora," he said, his voice thick with emotions he usually kept locked away. "She was my wife, and she was the kindest person I ever knew." He told them about Nora then, about how they had met on a terraforming mission and fallen in love under alien stars, about how she had spent her days teaching colonist children and her nights tending to the sick and the lonely, about how she had made their small home feel like the warmest place in the universe. And then he told them about the pirate raid that had come 3 years ago, about how Nora had hidden a group of children in the basement of the schoolhouse while the attackers burned through the settlement, about how she had stood in front of that basement door with nothing but her own body as a shield. "She saved 11 children that day," Cole said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But she didn't make it out herself." The cave was silent except for the soft crackling of the wind outside, and Cole felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes upon him, not judging, not pitying, Just witnessing his pain with a quiet respect, Vera reached out and placed one clawed hand on his arm. And the touch was surprisingly gentle. "She sounds like a true warrior," Vera said. "In my culture, those who die protecting the young are honored above all others. For there is no greater sacrifice." Cole swallowed hard and managed a small nod. Grateful for her words and for the unexpected comfort of this moment, "I tried to live the way she would have wanted me to," he said. "I try to help folks who need helping and protect folks who need protecting. Because that's what she believed in." Flicker had crawled closer during his story, and now she was sitting right beside him. Her small body pressed against his leg in a gesture of comfort that she probably did not fully understand. "You're not like the humans who came before," she said softly. "The ones who worked with the bad ones, the ones who hurt my papa." Cole felt his heart crack a little more at those words, at the knowledge of what this tiny creature had witnessed, and he made a silent vow right then and there. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not like them, and I promise you, little one, I will never let anyone hurt you or your family again. Not while there's breath in my body." Vera studied him for a long moment, and something in her golden eyes shifted. Some final barrier crumbling away. "You are not what I expected from a human," she said. Quietly, Cole smiled sadly and looked around at this small, broken family that had somehow found their way into his care. "Most folks ain't what you expect," he replied. "If you just give them a chance to show you who they really are." By morning, Cole had made his decision, and there was no doubt in his mind that it was the right one. Even though the path ahead would be dangerous and the odds were stacked against him, he could not leave Vera and her children in this burned valley where food was scarce and predators roamed freely, where the ghosts of war still lingered in every shadow and every pile of ash. So he would take them to the nearest human settlement 3 days' ride to the east. The settlement was called Dusty Hollow, a small outpost built into the side of a canyon where refugees from a dozen different worlds had gathered to rebuild their lives. And it had medical facilities and aid workers and supplies enough to give this family a real chance at survival. Vera was not strong enough to fly, her torn wings still healing from whatever violence had been done to them, and the hatchlings were too young to make the journey on foot. So Cole spent the early morning hours constructing a makeshift travois from salvaged wreckage he found scattered. Around the cave entrance, he lashed together metal beams and strips of cloth to create a platform large enough for Vera to lie upon. And then he attached the whole contraption to the back of his hoversteed with cables strong enough to hold the weight. "It ain't pretty," he admitted as he helped Vera settle onto the travois, arranging blankets around her to cushion the ride. "But it'll get you where you need to go." Vera accepted his help without protest, which told Cole more about her condition than any words could have. And when she was secure, he turned to the 3 hatchlings who stood watching with wide, uncertain eyes. "All right, little ones," he said, kneeling down to their level. "You're going to ride up front with me, and I need you to hold on tight and stay quiet when I tell you to. Can you do that?" Ember nodded solemnly, already taking his role as eldest sibling seriously, and he helped his sisters climb onto the hoversteed saddle before pulling himself up beside them. Cole mounted in front of them and felt 3 small bodies press against his back, seeking warmth and safety, and something in his chest swelled with a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. They set off as the sun crested the distant mountains, leaving behind the cave that had been both prison and refuge for this small family. And Cole guided Dusty eastward across the scorched landscape at a pace that was slow enough to keep Vera comfortable, but fast enough to cover real ground the first day passed without incident. Though the terrain was rough and the air carried a constant smell of smoke and decay that seemed to seep into everything, and Cole told stories to keep the hatchlings distracted, tales of New Montana and the great herds of cattle that roamed its plains. Stories of space voyages and strange planets and all the wonders he had seen in his travels. Flicker hung on every word, her curiosity boundless despite the hardships she had endured. And even Ash began to emerge from her shell, asking quiet questions about the creatures and places Cole described. When night fell, they made camp in the shelter of a rocky outcrop, and Cole built a small fire to keep away the chill and the predators that prowled in the darkness. And he shared his rations with the family, while Vera told her children stories of their own, legends of the Draconith people, tales of great heroes and ancient wisdom that had been passed down through generations. Cole listened with genuine interest, learning about a culture he had only known through war and tragedy. And he began to understand just how much had been lost when the syndicate came on the second day. The terrain grew more treacherous, with deep ravines cutting across their path and loose rocks threatening to send them tumbling into darkness at every turn. And Cole had to dismount several times to guide Dusty carefully around obstacles that the hoversteed's sensors could not navigate. Alone by nightfall, they had covered less distance than he had hoped, and Cole could see that Vera was growing weaker despite his best efforts to keep her comfortable, her scales losing more of their luster and her breathing becoming shallow and labored. He made camp early that night, finding a defensible position between two large boulders, and he was just starting to prepare their evening meal when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a howl, long and hungry, and answered by a chorus of others from different directions. And Cole recognized it immediately as the call of scavenger beasts, pack hunters, that had grown bold and numerous in the aftermath of the war, feeding on the dead and learning to hunt the living. "Get behind me," he said quietly to the hatchlings, his hand moving to his plasma revolver. "And stay close to your mama no matter what happens." The children scrambled to obey, pressing themselves against Vera's weakened form, and Cole positioned himself between his charges and the darkness where those hungry eyes were surely watching. They came from the shadows like nightmares made flesh, 6 of them in total, with matted fur and yellowed fangs and bodies scarred from countless battles. And they circled the camp with a predatory patience that spoke of intelligence and experience. Cole fired first, his plasma revolver lighting up the night with bolts of blue energy that found their marks with deadly accuracy. And 2 of the beasts fell before the others even registered the threat. But these creatures were not easily deterred, and the remaining 4 rushed forward as one, their jaws snapping and their claws tearing at the air. And Cole knew in that moment that his revolver alone would not be enough. He fought with everything he had, firing and dodging and using his body as a shield between the beasts and the Draconith family. And when one of the creatures got close enough to rake its claws across his arm, he barely felt the pain through the surge of adrenaline behind him. He heard Ember shouting and Flicker crying and Ash whimpering in fear, and the sound of their terror gave him strength he did not know he possessed. And then something extraordinary happened. Vera rose from the travois on trembling legs, her torn wings spreading wide despite the agony it must have caused her. And she opened her mouth and released a burst of flame that erupted from her throat like the fury of a dying star. The fire caught the pack leader full in the face, and the beast screamed and fled into the darkness, its followers close behind. And within seconds, the attack was over. Cole stood panting in the sudden silence, his arm bleeding and his heart pounding, and he turned to see Vera collapse back onto the travois, her momentary strength completely spent. "That was incredible," he breathed, rushing to her side to check her condition. "Are you okay?" Vera managed a weak smile, her golden eyes dimmed with exhaustion, but still holding a flicker of pride. "I could not let them hurt you," she whispered. "Not after everything you have done for us." Ember approached Cole slowly, looking at the human with something new in his young eyes. Not just respect, but a deeper recognition of what had just occurred. You fought for us, the hatchling said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. You stood between us and death like a clan brother would. Cole reached out and ruffled the boy's scaly head with his uninjured hand, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the dying fire. That's what folks do for family. Kid, he said softly, and in that moment, under the stars of an alien world, surrounded by danger and pain and uncertainty, Cole realized that this small broken family had become exactly that. His family, his responsibility. His reason to keep fighting the rest of the night passed without further incident, though Cole did not sleep, keeping watch over his charges with a vigilance born of love rather than duty by morning. Vera's condition had stabilized, and the hatchlings had found the courage to smile again. And Cole loaded them all back onto Dusty for the final leg of their journey. Dusty Hollow was only one more day away, and Cole was determined to get them there safely. No matter what obstacles still lay ahead, hold on tight, he told the hatchlings as the hoversteed hummed to life beneath them. We're almost home. Dusty Hollow appeared on the horizon like a mirage at first, its buildings carved into the red stone of the canyon walls and its streets, bustling with activity that seemed almost dreamlike after the silence of the burned lands. And Cole felt a wave of relief wash over him as he guided his weary hoversteed toward the settlement's main gate. The hatchlings pressed closer against his back, their small bodies tense with a mixture of excitement and fear as they stared at the crowds of humans moving through the streets below, and Cole could feel their hearts beating rapidly against his spine. It's okay, he said softly, reaching back to pat Flicker's leg reassuringly. These are good folks down there, and they're going to help us. But even as he spoke the words, Cole knew that the reality might be more complicated than his simple reassurance suggested, because not all humans shared his views on aliens, and the wounds of war had left many people bitter and suspicious of anyone who looked different. The guards at the gate stared openly as Cole rode in, their eyes widening at the sight of the Draconith mother on the travois and the three hatchlings perched on the hover steed. And Cole could see the questions and concerns forming on their faces. Hardly, one of the guards said, recognizing him from previous supply runs. What in the blazes are you doing bringing dragons into town? Cole kept his voice calm and steady, refusing to rise to the implied hostility in the man's words. They ain't dragons, he replied firmly. They're Draconith, and they're refugees who need medical attention and food and a safe place to rest. Same as any other war victims. The guard looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Cole's expression made him think better of it, and he waved them through with a reluctant gesture that suggested this was far from over words spread quickly through the settlement as Cole made his way toward the medical tent, and he could feel the eyes of dozens of people following them, some curious, some hostile, some simply confused by the unexpected sight. By the time he reached the medical area, a small crowd had gathered, and Cole could hear the whispers spreading through the group like wildfire. Are those the creatures the Syndicate was hunting? Why would he bring them here? They could be dangerous. What was he thinking? Cole ignored the voices and dismounted carefully, then turned to help Vera off the travois while the hatchlings scrambled down from the saddle on their own. The entrance to the medical tent opened, and a woman emerged, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and her hands already reaching for medical supplies. My name is Grace Holloway, she said, her voice carrying the no-nonsense tone of someone who had seen too much suffering to waste time on prejudice. And I'm the head medic here. Let me take a look at this patient. Cole felt a surge of gratitude for this woman, who asked no questions about species or politics, who simply saw someone in need and moved to help. And he stepped aside to let her examine Vera while Grace worked. A man pushed his way through the crowd. Hank Mercer, the settlement's supply chief, and a man Cole had butted heads with on more than one occasion. Hartley, Hank said, his voice thick with anger and something that might have been fear. You can't bring these creatures into a human settlement. We've got enough problems without adding alien refugees to the mix. The hatchling shrank back at the hostility in his voice. And Flicker grabbed Cole's hand with a grip that trembled with fear. Cole felt his own temper rising. But he forced himself to stay calm, because losing control now would only make things worse. These people lost everything, he said, his voice carrying clearly so that the entire crowd could hear. Their home, their family, their hope. And all because the syndicate decided that their lives were worth less than the weapons they could make from their bodies. He looked around at the faces watching him, seeing the fear and uncertainty, but also seeing something else in some of those eyes. A flicker of compassion. A memory of their own losses. A recognition that suffering did not belong to any single species. If we turn them away, Cole continued. If we refuse to help people in need just because they don't look like us, then we ain't no better than the syndicate. We become exactly what we fought against. The crowd fell silent. And for a long moment, no one moved or spoke. And then a voice rang out from somewhere in the back. The cowboy's right. A man stepped forward, Sam Pritchard, the settlement's cook. A large fellow with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. I didn't lose my brother to syndicate raiders so we could become the kind of people who turn away hungry children. Sam said firmly, whatever these folks need, I'll make sure they get fed. Another voice joined in, Lily Vance, the young woman who ran the settlement school. The little ones can come to my class, she offered. Children are children, no matter what planet they come from. More voices added themselves to the chorus. Not everyone, but enough to shift the balance of the crowd. And Cole felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon. Hank looked around at the changing mood, his jaw tight with frustration, but he was smart enough to know when he was outnumbered. Fine, he said grudgingly. But if there's any trouble, it's on your head. Heartily, Cole nodded, accepting the responsibility without hesitation, because he had already accepted it the moment he found Vera and her children in that cave. The next several days passed in a blur of activity as the settlement absorbed its unexpected guests. Grace treated Vera's injuries with skill and compassion, cleaning the wounds on her wings and providing nutrients to help her body recover from weeks of starvation. And slowly the color began to return to her scale. Sam kept his promise, preparing meals that the Draconith could eat and even learning a few recipes from Vera when she was strong enough to share them. And soon the smell of alien spices mingled with the familiar scents of the settlement's kitchen. Lily welcomed the hatchlings into her classroom, where they sat among human children and learned to read and write in the common language. And Flicker proved to be a quick study who made friends with surprising ease, but not everyone was happy with the new arrivals. One evening, as Cole sat outside the medical tent, keeping watch over Vera and her sleeping children, a group of settlers approached with torches and angry faces. This ain't right, the leader said, a man Cole recognized as one of Hank's supporters. We didn't rebuild this settlement to share it with aliens, and we want them gone. Cole rose slowly to his feet, positioning himself between the mob and the tent entrance, and he felt the familiar weight of his revolver against his hip, but knew that drawing it would only make things worse. These folks ain't going anywhere, he said quietly. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until they're ready and have somewhere safe to go. The tension crackled in the air like lightning waiting to strike, and Cole could see the anger in these people's eyes, the fear that drove them to hate what they did not understand. And then Ember stepped out of the tent behind Cole, his young face set with a determination that seemed far too old for his years. Please, the hatchling said, his voice small but steady. We don't want to cause trouble, we just want to be safe. And Cole is the only human who has ever been kind to us. The crowd shifted uncomfortably at the sight of this child, because that's what he was. Despite his scales and his claws, Just a frightened child who wanted the same things any child wants. The leader of the group stared at Ember for a long moment, and something in his expression changed, some of the hatred draining away to be replaced by uncertainty. "Come on," another man in the group said quietly. "Let's just go. This ain't worth it." One by one, the torches lowered and the crowd dispersed, leaving Cole and Ember standing alone in the cooling night air. "You're a brave kid," Cole said, putting a hand on the hatchling's shoulder. "Your father would be proud." Ember looked up at him with eyes that glistened in the starlight. "I think he would be proud of you, too," the boy replied. 2 weeks had passed since Cole rode into Dusty Hollow with his unusual passengers. And in that time, the settlement had slowly transformed in ways both small and profound. Vera's strength had returned enough for her to walk on her own, though her wings would need more time to heal fully, and her scales had regained their beautiful emerald shine that sparkled in the morning light like precious gems. The binge hatchlings had blossomed under the care of the settlement's people, growing stronger and happier with each passing day. And watching them play with the human children in Lily's schoolyard had become one of Cole's favorite pastimes. But he knew this peace could not last forever, because Dusty Hollow was not built to house refugees permanently. And Vera and her children deserved more than a temporary shelter. They deserved a real home where they could live without fear. The answer came one afternoon in the form of a supply frigate that descended through the clouds and landed at the settlement's small docking platform, its hull gleaming silver in the sunlight. A man emerged from the ship, tall and weathered, with the bearing of someone who had spent most of his life among the stars, and he introduced himself as Captain Eli Dawson of the vessel known as the Dusty Trail. "I heard there were Draconith refugees here," Eli said, shaking Cole's hand with a firm grip. "And I came to offer them transport to a coalition sanctuary world, where survivors of the Syndicate's atrocities are being resettled." Cole felt a complicated mix of emotions at these words. Relief that Vera and her children would have a safe place to go, but also a surprising sadness at the thought of saying goodbye. "There's a planet called Haven in the Epsilon system," Eli continued, "where humans and Draconith and a dozen other species are building a new community together. I think your friends would be welcome there." That night, Cole shared the news with Vera while the hatchlings slept peacefully in the corner of the medical tent, their small bodies curled together like a pile of colorful stones. "A sanctuary world," Vera repeated, her golden eyes distant as she processed the possibility. "A place where my children could grow up without fear, where they could learn what it means to be Draconith without hiding." She turned to Cole with an expression that held gratitude and sorrow, and something else he could not quite name. "You have given us so much," she said quietly. "Not just food and shelter and protection, but hope. And I do not know how we can ever repay you." Cole shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise, because he had never done any of this for recognition or reward. "You don't owe me nothing," he said. "I did what any decent person would do, what Nora would have done, what she did do when those children needed her." Vera reached out and took his weathered hand in her clawed one, holding it with a gentleness that belied her fearsome appearance. "Among my people," she said, "there is an ancient tradition that has been passed down through countless generations, and it is the highest honor we can bestow upon an outsider." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of ritual and meaning. "When someone saves a clan from destruction, when they offer protection and kindness without expectation of return, they become bound to that clan forever. And they carry our fire within them wherever they go." She pressed her other hand to Cole's chest, directly over his heart, and he felt a warmth spread through him that seemed to sink into his very bones. "You are now kin to the Sunscale line, Cole Hartley," Vera declared. "Our fire burns in you. Our strength flows through you, and wherever you are in this vast universe, You will never be alone again." Cole blinked against the unexpected tears that prickled at his eyes, because he had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of Nora's memory and his own grief without anyone to share the burden. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Vera smiled, and it was a beautiful expression that transformed her face from fearsome to radiant. "Say that you will not forget us," she replied. "Say that you will think of us sometimes when you look up at the stars and know that somewhere out there, a family owes their lives to your kindness." The morning of their departure arrived too quickly, bringing with it a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze that seemed to whisper of new beginnings and bittersweet farewells. The settlement had gathered at the landing platform to see the Draconith family off, a testament to how much had changed in such a short time. And Cole stood at the front of the crowd with his hat in his hands. Vera approached him first, her emerald scales catching the light as she moved with a grace that spoke of returning health and renewed dignity. "I do not have words sufficient to thank you," she said, "but I will spend the rest of my days telling my children and their children and their children's children about the human cowboy who saved us when all hope was lost." Cole managed a small smile despite the tightness in his throat. "You just take care of those little ones," he said, "and live a good life, and that'll be thanks enough for me." The hatchlings came next, each one saying goodbye in their own way. Ash, who had been so quiet and frightened when they first met, surprised everyone by throwing her small arms around Cole's leg and hugging him tightly without saying a word. And the gesture spoke louder than any speech could have ever approached, with the solemnity of a young warrior, extending his hand in the human style of greeting that he had learned from watching Cole. "I will remember you, clan brother," he said, his voice steady and strong, "and when I am grown, I will honor your example by helping those who cannot help themselves." Cole shook the boy's hand with genuine respect, recognizing the man he was becoming, even in this moment of farewell. "You're going to do great things, kid," Cole said. "I can feel it in my bones." And then there was Flicker, the littlest one, who had been crying softly since she woke up that morning and realized what this day would bring. She ran to Cole, and he knelt down to catch her, wrapping his arms around her small, trembling body as she sobbed into his shoulder. "I don't want to go," she whimpered. "I want to stay with you." Cole held her tightly, feeling his own heart breaking at her words, and he stroked her back gently until her sobs subsided. "Listen to me, little one," he said softly, pulling back to look into her tearful eyes. "You got a whole big life ahead of you, full of adventures and wonders you can't even imagine yet. And you're going to a place where you'll be safe and loved and happy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, the shiny rock that Ash had given him on the night of the scavenger attack. "I want you to have this," he said, pressing it into her palm, "and whenever you feel scared or lonely, you hold on to it and remember that somewhere in the universe, a human cowboy is thinking about you and wishing you well." Flicker clutched the rock to her chest and managed a watery smile. "Will we ever see you again?" she asked. Cole glanced up at the stars that were beginning to fade in the morning light, and he thought about all the vastness of the galaxy and all the unlikely paths that had brought them together. "I reckon the universe has a way of bringing people back together," he said. When it matters most, Captain Eli called for boarding, and Cole watched as Vera gathered her children and led them up the ramp into the ship, turning one last time to wave before disappearing inside. The engines hummed to life, and the frigate lifted slowly from the platform, climbing higher and higher until it was nothing more than a speck of silver against the blue expanse of sky. Sam Pritchard walked up beside Cole, arms crossed over his broad chest. "You really think they'll be okay out there?" Sam Askell put his hat back on and watched the ship until it vanished completely, carrying with it a piece of his heart he had not known he still possessed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I reckon they will. They're tougher than they look." Most folks are. He turned and began walking back toward the settlement, toward the work that still needed doing and the people who still needed helping. But he paused at the edge of the platform and looked up at the sky one more time. And a small smile crossed his weathered face. And now they know, he said to no one in particular. They ain't alone. The words hung in the air like a promise, and somewhere far above, a ship full of hope and gratitude and newfound family sailed on toward tomorrow.